Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take a subject you think you know, stack up the source material, and shortcut you right to the most compelling, surprising, and essential nuggets of knowledge.
And today, we are embarking on an exploration into a life story that is just, well, a testament to radical, relentless commitment. We're talking about Maria Salomea Skłodowska-Curie.
Right. And it's not just some historic scientist in a textbook.
Oh, not at all. We're looking at how one woman fought really three different wars at the same time. There was the fight against an oppressive empire, the fight to understand the fundamental structure of the atom, and this relentless fight against institutional and societal prejudice.
That framing, the three wars, that's perfect, because our mission for you in this deep dive is to unpack the sources and show you how Marie Curie accomplished what seems, completely impossible.
She becomes the first woman to win a Nobel Prize.
And the only person in history to win in two completely different scientific fields, physics and chemistry.
And on top of that, she breaks the highest academic ceiling, becoming the first woman professor at the University of Paris.
And the source material is so clear on this. These massive achievements weren't just built on genius. They were built on a foundation of, sustained poverty, intense xenophobia, and just relentless sexism.
So our deep dive gives you this detailed chronological look at her journey. We're going to trace her difficult, patriotic early years in Warsaw under Russian occupation, then her pioneering research in France that basically redefined physics.
And then her global influence, her humanitarian work during the war, and ultimately her lasting, profound, and literally radioactive legacy.
So let's start at the beginning.
Okay, let's unpack this. We begin in Poland. So before she was the celebrated French icon Marie Curie, she was Maria Skłodowska. She was born in Warsaw on November 7, 1867.
And it's so important to understand this wasn't just Poland. This was Warsaw, under the iron fist of the Russian Empire.
A political reality that just defined everything about her early life and her ambition.
Completely.
Mm-hmm.
That political context is absolutely vital. The family itself carried the scars of Polish resistance. Both her father's and her mother's families had lost their fortunes, their property.
Why? What happened?
Because of their patriotic involvement in these Polish national uprisings. The most recent one was the January uprising of 1863 to 65. So these losses, which were, basically financial punishments for being a patriot, meant Maria and her siblings were facing this systemic financial struggle from day one.
So poverty wasn't a choice for them, it was a political inheritance. And yet, the household she grew up in was steeped in education.
Oh, yes. Her parents were well-known teachers. Her father, Maria Skłodowska, taught mathematics and physics. And this is where you start to see the first sort of quiet acts of defiance.
How so?
Well, the Russian authorities were systematically trying to suppress Polish intellectual life. That included eliminating laboratory instruction from Polish schools. They were afraid it might empower, future generations of independent thinkers.
So what did her father do?
Wodiso, in response, just brought the essential lab equipment home. He instructed his own children privately. So the source of her future scientific revolution, her early training in experimental physics, it was basically a small, clandestine act of patriotic resistance happening in their living room.
That's an incredible origin story. What else was shaping her worldview in those early years? It sounds incredibly difficult.
It was. And there was also this profound experience of loss. Maria, whose nickname Mania was, she was deeply affected by the death of her oldest sibling, Zofia, from typhus. And then her mother, Bronisowa, died of tuberculosis when Maria was only 10.
Wow, both of them.
Yeah. And the sources suggest that this double tragedy, especially seeing her mother's long suffering, it fundamentally challenged her religious faith. It led her to move away from Catholicism and eventually to become agnostic.
So she graduates from secondary school at the gymnasium in 1883, and she wins the gold medal, the highest honor. She's brilliant, she's driven, she's ready for university.
And the system immediately slams the door in her face. Yeah. As a woman in partitioned Poland, she could not enroll in any regular institution of higher education. Period. This barrier led her to seek out education wherever she could find it, which meant this clandestine network. It was called the Flying University.
The Flying University? It sounds amazing.
It was an institution that operated in secret, constantly shifting locations, devoted to providing Polish patriotic higher education, and crucially, it admitted women. It just underscores how deeply interwoven education and national identity were for her generation.
But this ambition had to be paid for somehow.
It had to be financed by raw labor, which brings us to this crucial moment, the go-between agreement.
This is the deal she makes with her sister, right?
Yes, her elder sister, Bronislawa. They struck this monumental deal. Marie would work for 5 years to pay for Bronislawa's medical studies in Paris. And then Bronislawa would do the same for her, providing assistance to fund Maria's own education.
It's a stunning plan. It relies entirely on dedication and just years of delayed gratification. So Maria starts working, first as a home tutor, and then for 2 years as a governess.
For the Orowski family in a place called Shuki. And this period, well, it brought a lot of personal complexity that really tested her resolve.
This is where she had her first serious heartbreak.
Exactly. While she's employed by the Orowskis, she falls deeply in love with their son, Kazimierz Orowski. He was a student at the time who would later become a very eminent mathematician. They actually planned to get married.
But then, once again, these forces of class and finance just crush her dreams.
Kazimier's parents, they saw her only as the governess, the penniless relative, and they absolutely rejected the idea of the marriage. The sources show how immense the pain was for both of them.
It wasn't just a brief crush.
Not at all. It was a profound, formative loss. There's even this poignant detail in the sources that years later, when Kazimierz was a revered professor and rector at Krakow University, he would often just sit contemplating before the statue of Maria Skłodowska that was erected in Warsaw.
Wow. So that painful rejection really just cemented her focus away from romance and towards her singular goal.
It did. And she had planned to work for 2 years, but gathering the money took her significantly longer, about 1.5 years longer than she'd hoped.
So how did she keep her scientific dreams alive while she's just working and saving day after day?
She kept up with this rigorous self-education, and critically, she got practical scientific training between 1890 and 1891. She worked in a chemistry lab at the Museum of Industry and Agriculture.
And this wasn't some amateur setup.
No, not at all. This lab was run by her cousin, Józef Boguski, who himself had been an assistant to the great Russian chemist, Dmitry Mendeleev. This hands-on experience meant she arrived in Paris not as a novice, but with real foundational skills in experimental chemistry.
So by late 1891, at 24 years old, she finally has enough money, and she leaves Poland to join her sister in Paris. I mean, you just can't overstate the willpower it took to endure years of emotionally painful labor just to chase a dream she was forbidden from achieving at home.
She had already fought and won her first war, the fight against poverty and those institutional barriers. So she arrives in Paris, and Maria Skłodowska begins her new identity. She becomes Marie. She enrolls at the University of Paris, the Sorbonne, ready to just immerse herself in physics, chemistry, and mathematics.
And this phase of her life, it's just characterized by this sheer academic drive, but it's mixed with this almost Dickensian level of deprivation, especially when you look at her living situation in the Latin Quarter.
Oh, absolutely. She deliberately rented a garret, an attic room, closer to the university. She was prioritizing proximity to knowledge over any kind of comfort.
And living on nothing.
Truly meager resources. The sources say she sometimes got so intensely focused on her studies that she would simply forget to eat. There's this stark image of her dedication. She would routinely wear all the clothes she owned, layer upon layer, just to generate enough body heat to survive the bitter Parisian winters in her unheated attic.
That's just survival through sheer intellectual willpower.
It is. But the dedication paid off, and quickly. By 1893, just 2 years in, she was awarded a degree in physics. And then, with the help of a fellowship, by the way, that she later insisted on paying back once she started earning money, she earned a second degree in 1894.
What was she focused on right then, before all the revolutionary work started?
Her initial research project before she met Pierre was a practical one. She was investigating the magnetic properties of various steels, and it was while she was looking for lab space for this research that she met Pierre Curie in 1894.
Right. They were introduced by a Polish physicist, Józef Kowalski. He thought Pierre might have some bench space available for her at his school, the ESPCI.
And that professional request, well, it quickly evolved into something much, much deeper. Their connection was immediate and profound, forged entirely over their shared, mutual, almost religious devotion to science.
Pierre proposed marriage, but Marie, she still had this idea of returning to Poland to serve her country, so she initially refused.
And Pierre's reaction to that is just another testament to his commitment.
He said he'd follow her, right?
He declared that if she returned to Poland, he would follow her, even if it meant giving up his own research and just teaching French classes there. That level of devotion, both personal and intellectual, is what persuaded her to reconsider.
She did go back to Poland for the summer break in 1894, still hoping to get an academic job.
But once again, academic prejudice showed its face. She was denied a post at Krakow University because of this pervasive academic sexism. That injustice, combined with Pierre's dedication, was really the final factor that convinced her that her future and the future of her research was in Paris and with Pierre.
So they get married on July 26, 1895, and they opt for a simple civil ceremony. I love the anecdote about her wedding dress.
Or lack thereof. Her practical dark blue outfit served as her working laboratory attire for years afterward. It just perfectly encapsulates her priorities.
And their shared life was immediately shaped by these revolutionary scientific discoveries happening all around them.
Absolutely. 1895, Wilhelm Röntgen announces X-rays. Then, a year later, in 1896, Henri Becquerel reveals that uranium salts spontaneously emit these penetrating rays. This latter discovery was the catalyst. It became the topic for Marie's doctoral thesis.
She needed a topic, and Becquerel's rays were this mystery just waiting to be solved. So how did she go beyond just observing them and really pioneer the field?
She used the most sensitive equipment she could find, a highly specialized electrometer. This device had actually been developed by Pierre and his brother Jacques. It was based on the principle of quartz piezoelectricity.
And it could do what, exactly?
It could precisely measure the faint electrical current caused by the rays ionizing the air around a sample. So it was a quantitative approach to what had been, until then, a qualitative mystery.
So she's not just seeing the rays, she's rigorously measuring their power in different compounds. And what was the critical finding from all this?
The finding was elegantly simple, but also fundamentally destabilizing. She discovered that the activity of the uranium compounds depended only on the quantity of uranium present.
That's it.
That's it. It didn't matter what state the uranium was in, powdered, massive, wet, dry, what other molecules it was bonded to, none of that mattered.
Which is the aha moment that changed physics. Because if the activity has nothing to do with molecular interactions, where else could it be coming from?
It forces a single conclusion. The radiation must be an inherent property of the atom itself.
Wow.
And that hypothesis was the critical revolutionary step. Up to this point, the prevailing model from John Dalton held that atoms were indivisible. They were immutable, the ultimate, unchanging building blocks of matter. Marie Curie's data showed the atom was not static, it was dynamic, it was powerful, it was the first real crack in the structure of classical physics.
And she didn't stop with uranium. She quickly found that another element, thorium, was doing the same thing. She had established the existence of a completely new physical phenomenon. Okay, so the next step was just pure observation, but it led to years of this just punishing labor. Marie's systematic measurements showed that some uranium minerals, especially pitchblende and torbernite, were far more active than pure uranium. Pitchblende was 4 times as active.
Right, and the scientific logic from that is inescapable. These minerals must contain small quantities of another substance, some unknown element, that was far, far more intensely active than uranium.
And that observation immediately pivots her research from just analyzing a phenomenon to this focused hunch for new elements.
And Pierre was so intrigued, so convinced by her findings, that he dropped his own advanced work on crystals in mid-1898 to join her. Her doctoral thesis effectively became this joint revolutionary endeavor.
And this is where we have to talk about the working conditions. I mean, their laboratory was the stuff of legend, but for all the wrong reasons.
It was a disaster. A poorly ventilated, non-waterproof converted shed next to the ESPCI. It used to be a medical dissecting room. The sources describe leaky ceilings, freezing winters, zero proper ventilation.
And the devastating, tragic irony of it all is that they had no idea of the dangers. They were handling massive quantities of highly radioactive substances completely unprotected.
And they were fascinated by it. They'd often note the faint light the materials emitted in the dark.
Before we get to the elements themselves, you should mention Marie's fierce insistence on intellectual priority. She wanted credit for her work.
And she deserved it. She was terrified that others might quickly capitalize on her idea, so she rushed to publish her initial findings. Her paper was presented to the Académie des Sciences by her former professor, Gabriel Lippmann, in April 1898. She was actively fighting that historical tendency to just overlook the work of women scientists.
And that insistence secured her place in history. In July of 1898, they published their first major discovery.
The announcement of the first new element. They named it polonium.
And the name itself was a political statement.
Oh, absolutely. It was explicitly to honor Marie's native Poland, which, as we said, was still partitioned by 3 empires.
Yeah.
It's widely thought that polonium might have been the first element ever named to highlight a political question, linking her science directly to her deep-seated patriotism.
And just 5 months later, December 26, 1898, they announce a second element.
Radium. named from the Latin word for ray.
Yeah.
And most enduringly, in the process of all this, they coined the overarching term for this new field, radioactivity.
These announcements were triumphs, but they created this immediate, immense challenge. To prove it, to satisfy the skeptical scientific community, they had to isolate pure, measurable samples.
Right. It's not enough to say it's there. You have to hold it in your hand.
And this is the part of the story that turns Marie Curie from a brilliant theorist into, well, an industrial pioneer. They quickly realized their initial 100 grams of pitchblende wasn't going to cut it.
Not even close. Because these elements were present in such minute trace quantities, way less than 1 part per million, they realized they needed tons of the ore. They secured cheap mining residue from an Austrian mining company, and their poorly ventilated shed effectively became a small, intensely radioactive chemical factory.
And describing the physical labor barely does it justice. This was chemical separation on an industrial scale. They were crushing, dissolving, heating, literally tons of material. And the chemistry of radium made it uniquely difficult.
That's right. Polonium was chemically similar to bismuth, which made its preliminary separation relatively straightforward. Radium, however, was a nightmare. It's chemically related to barium, and barium was also abundant in the pitchblende residue.
And their chemical properties are almost identical.
Almost identical, which makes separating them extraordinarily challenging.
So how do you separate two elements that behave in almost the exact same way?
They had to use this tedious, almost medieval process called differential crystallization. It relies on this incredibly slight difference in the solubility of radium chloride compared to barium chloride. You dissolve the mixture, you let the salts crystallize, and then you scrape off the first crystals that form, which would have a slightly higher concentration of the radium.
And this wasn't a one-and-done process.
Oh, far from it. This required repeating that whole process, crystallizing, dissolving, recrystallizing thousands of times. Literally thousands of fractional crystallizations to get any significant level of purity.
The physical toll must have been immense. Marie later described carrying 20-kilogram samples, stirring boiling vats with an iron rod.
All in that unheated, leaky shed with corrosive fumes. This was 4 years of grueling, relentless physical and chemical labor.
And the yield for all that sacrifice, what did they get?
From 1 ton of pitchblende, they obtained 1/10 of a gram of radium chloride in 1902.
1/10 of a gram.
That tiny glowing amount was the physical proof they needed. Marie later managed to isolate pure radium metal in 1910. But she never did isolate polonium metal because its half-life is just too short, only 138 days.
But the results of this labor weren't just abstract physics. They had immediate, tangible medical applications, even before the Nobel.
Yes, they published 32 papers between 1898 and 1902. One of them included the critical observation that diseased, tumor-forming cells seem to be destroyed faster than healthy cells when exposed to radium. That fundamental insight was the key that unlocked the door to radiation therapy. It laid the entire groundwork for modern cancer treatment. So the scientific world was just stunned by the Curie's output, and that led pretty swiftly to the recognition they deserved, or, well, almost failed to receive.
Right. In 1903, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to Marie Curie, Pierre Curie, and Henri Becquerel for their joint research on radiation.
But even to this absolute pinnacle of global recognition, that deeply entrenched institutional sexism tried to sideline her.
The committee didn't originally include her, did they?
No. They initially intended to honor only the men, Pierre and Becquerel. Marie's pivotal role, coming up with the thesis, coining the term, discovering the elements, was almost ignored.
So what happened? How did she get included?
Her inclusion was only secured because a Swedish mathematician, Magnus Gustav Mittig-Leffler, who was a champion for women in science, he alerted Pierre to the situation. Pierre then complained directly to the committee, and only then was Marie's name included.
That detail is so crucial. It shows her victory wasn't just against the atom, it was against the establishment itself. She becomes the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, but only after her husband had to intervene.
And in a classic Curie move, they didn't even attend the initial ceremony in Stockholm. They cited busy work schedules, Pierre's failing health, and just a general dislike of public events. They delivered their required Nobel lecture later in 1905. The immediate practical benefit of the award money, though, was critical. It let them finally hire their first, desperately needed laboratory assistant.
But just as their careers reached this peak, tragedy struck with devastating speed.
On April 19, 1906, Pierre Curie was walking across a Paris street in a rainstorm. He slipped and was instantly struck and run over by a heavy horse-drawn delivery vehicle. It fractured his skull and killed him instantly.
Just done.
Gone. Marie must have been absolutely shattered. How did the sources describe her reaction, her ability to keep going after that?
They describe a woman in profound, isolated grief, but at the same time, driven by this almost unstoppable scientific engine. She internalized the loss, but she channeled her energy instantly into fulfilling Pierre's scientific dream. She wrote about her determination to continue the work, feeling it was the only way she could honor him.
A month after his death, the University of Paris finally recognized her individual merit. They offered Marie the chair of physics that had been created for Pierre.
And she accepted it. She was motivated by the express hope of creating that world-class laboratory they had always dreamed of, a proper facility, not a shed. And by accepting, she broke yet another massive institutional barrier. She became the first woman professor at the University of Paris in 1906. Her work just accelerated from there. In 1910, she finally isolates pure metallic radium. And just as importantly, she defines an international standard for radioactive emissions.
Which was eventually named the Curie,
Yeah.
after the couple. She was now the undisputed global authority in her field.
But that institutional resistance in France, it hadn't disappeared.
No, it was just dormant.
Yeah.
In 1911, she tried to get elected to the French Academy of Sciences, a crowning achievement. She failed. She lost by just 1 or 2 votes. They selected a man named Edouard Branly instead.
And this rejection was driven by something much more sinister than just academic disagreement.
Oh, absolutely. It was a vicious combination of sexism and rampant xenophobia. The right-wing French press seized on the Academy vote to vilify her. They painted her as a foreign, atheist interloper. They questioned her loyalty to France. It was an intense nationalist campaign.
And that institutional exclusion, fueled by xenophobia, was quickly followed by this explosion of personal scandal that the tabloids weaponized.
Also in 1911, yes, the press sensationally revealed her year-long affair with Paul Langevin. He was a brilliant French physicist, a former student of Pierre's, but he was married and estranged from his wife.
And the press just went into a frenzy. How did the narrative they pushed against her escalate things?
They demonized her. Marie, who was 5 years older than Langevin, was viciously portrayed as a foreign Jewish homewrecker, even though she was agnostic. The scandal got so intense that an angry mob actually gathered outside her home. She and her daughters had to seek refuge with friends. It was a terrifying public shaming campaign.
Rooted entirely in prejudice against her gender and her national origin.
Completely. But despite this onslaught, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences stood firm on her scientific contributions.
And they awarded her the 1911 Nobel Prize in Chemistry. This one was specifically in recognition of her services to the advancement of chemistry by the discovery of the elements radium and polonium.
By the isolation of radium and the study of the nature and compounds of this remarkable element.
But even the Nobel Committee got nervous about the scandal. The chairman, Sanfante Arrhenius, actually tried to prevent her from attending the ceremony.
He did. He argued that her questionable moral standing was, incompatible with the honor.
And Marie Curie's response to him is maybe her greatest defense against all this societal pressure.
It's incredible. She replied unequivocally that the prize was given for her scientific work, and there was, and I'm quoting here, no relation between her scientific work and the facts of her private life.
Wow.
She attended the ceremony. She delivered her lecture. She stood firm on the separation of professional genius and personal choices.
That radical self-defense is just a cornerstone of her legacy. She remains the only person to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields. Physics and chemistry achieved in the face of scientific skepticism in 1903 and this total moralizing frenzy in 1911.
So after that Nobel triumph, Marie's focus really shifted to creating a permanent scientific infrastructure. Her long quest for a proper facility culminated in the completion of the Radium Institute, the Institut du Radium, in Paris in 1914. It was a joint initiative of the Pasteur Institute and the University of Paris.
And even though she'd been offered the directorship of a new lab in Warsaw in 1912, she chose to focus on the Paris Institute, which really cemented France as the global epicenter of radioactivity research.
But the Institute's grand opening was immediately interrupted by the outbreak of World War I.
And this is the period that sees Marie Curie transition from an academic researcher into a radical humanitarian, applying her knowledge directly to saving lives on the battlefield.
She realized instantly that timely, accurate X-rays could prevent unnecessary amputations and save countless wounded soldiers. The problem was the X-ray machines were static. They were housed in distant city hospitals.
So she recognized this critical logistical gap You can't bring the soldiers to the X-rays, so you have to bring the X-rays to the front lines. How on earth did she execute this massive undertaking, especially as a single woman during wartime?
She started with a rapid, intensive period of self-training. She studied radiology, human anatomy to understand fracture localization, and critically, she taught herself automotive mechanics
She learned to fix cars.
so she could maintain the vehicles that would transport the equipment. She then went out and procured X-ray machines, vehicles, generators, and developed the famous mobile radiography units, which the soldiers affectionately called the petites Curies, the little Curies.
This was a colossal, self-directed wartime project. She was acting as the head of logistics, the lead physician, and the chief mechanic all at once.
Exactly. As the director of the Red Cross Radiology Service, she established France's first military radiology center in late 1914. She personally directed the installation of 20 of these mobile radiological vehicles and oversaw the setup of 200 radiological units at field hospitals across the front.
And her daughter, Irene, was right there with her.
Yes, her 17-year-old daughter assisted her in this dangerous work. Marie herself was often driving these mobile units, and she was training other women as radiological aides. She effectively created a whole network of wartime medical technologists almost overnight.
And beyond just X-raying soldiers, she also applied her own precious radium supply directly to treatment.
In 1915, she supervised the production of these hollow needles containing radium emanation, which we now know as the gas radon, using radium from her own supply. These needles were used to sterilize and treat infected tissue in hospitals. A remarkable act, considering how hard it was to get that radium in the first place.
This effort was just monumental. It's estimated over 1 million wounded soldiers were treated using her X-ray units and radium treatments during the war. So when we look at the official record, what kind of recognition did she get from the French government for this immense sacrifice?
It's astonishing and frustrating. Despite saving countless French lives through this massive, self-funded, and self-directed war effort, Marie Curie never received any formal recognition or honor from the French government.
Not even the Legion of Honor.
Nothing. She was so committed, she even tried to donate her gold Nobel Prize medals to the French National Bank to help the war effort. They refused to accept them.
They refused them.
Said they had ceremonial value, so she was forced to buy war bonds with her prize money instead. She just remarked that she had no illusions the money would be lost, but the state needs it.
So after the war, she documents this incredible period in her book, Radiology in War. But the international community was eager to recognize her.
Oh, her fame was global. In 1921, she toured the United States to raise funds for radium research. And a high point of this tour was when President Warren G. Harding personally presented her with 1 gram of radium collected in the U.S., a priceless gift at the time.
And the irony is, it was this foreign recognition that finally shamed the French government into action.
Correct. Embarrassed by her lack of official French distinction, they offered her the Legion of Honor.
And she refused it.
She refused it. Her actions consistently prioritized scientific independence and humanitarian service over any institutional recognition.
And she continued to influence global science and policy. She became fellow of the French Academy of Medicine. She served alongside Albert Einstein on the League of Nations International Committee on Intellectual Cooperation.
And her second American tour, in 1929, was dedicated to financing the Warsaw Radium Institute, which fulfilled that lifelong commitment to her Polish roots. It opened in 1932, directed by her dedicated sister, Bronislawa.
And the scientific legacy continued directly through her own family. The Curie Institute she founded produced 4 more Nobel Prize winners, including her daughter, Irene Joliot-Curie, and her son-in-law, Frédéric Joliot-Curie. Her relentless focus created a lasting dynasty of atomic science. Marie Curie's commitment to science and her sacrifice during the war, well, they ultimately cost her her life. She died on July 4, 1934, at the age of 66. The cause was aplastic anemia, which was universally attributed to long-term exposure to ionizing radiation.
It's the ultimate tragic conclusion to this story of scientific heroism. The dangers of ionizing radiation were simply unknown during the era of her pioneering work. She routinely carried radioactive test tubes in her pockets, sometimes noting the beautiful faint light they emitted, and she stored samples in her desk drawer, treating them with a kind of curious fascination rather than extreme caution.
And the sources suggest a specific period of exposure may have been the real defining factor in her illness.
Yes. When her body was exhumed in 1995 to be transferred to the Pantheon, her remains had to be sealed in a thick lead lining because of the continuing radioactivity. But the medical examination afterwards suggested that her illness, the plastic anemia, was more likely due to the acute, heavy exposure she got from working with unshielded X-ray equipment during her World War I efforts.
So not the years of handling radium in the lab.
Less that, and more the intense radiography work. The ultimate sacrifice. The very effort she undertook to save 1 million soldiers may have been the defining factor in her own death.
So what does her work fundamentally change about our understanding of the universe?
It laid the absolute foundational pillars for modern nuclear physics, for cancer radiation treatments, and for medical radiography. By providing the first evidence that radiation comes from within the atom, she didn't just add a new idea, she forced a fundamental paradigm shift. Classical physics, which relied on the conservation of energy and the idea that atoms were immutable, had to completely rewrite its rulebook. And her techniques for isolating these radioactive isotopes are still fundamental to research today.
And let's turn to the ethical core of her work, something Albert Einstein really praised her for. She and Pierre made this profoundly moral decision about their discoveries.
They did. They intentionally and deliberately refrained from patenting the radium isolation process. Their reasoning was simple and uncompromising. They believed the scientific community should be able to conduct research unhindered by commercial interests or profit motives.
A powerful statement, especially in an era when massive fortunes were being built around new scientific discoveries.
Absolutely. Marie maintained that ethical stance her whole life. She was known for her profound honesty and modest lifestyle, often directing prize money and gifts straight to the institutions she worked for or to her family and students. This lack of personal greed is what led Einstein to reportedly say that she was the only famous person he knew who could not be corrupted by fame.
Her global status and her enduring presence are just remarkable. She became the first woman interred on her own merits in the Paris Pantheon in 1995.
And the honors are legion. The element curium, atomic number 96, the unit of radioactivity, the Curie. 3 radioactive minerals are named after the Curies. She's been immortalized on currency. Her legacy is just one of pure, unadulterated scientific and moral courage.
So this deep dive reveals that Marie Curie's life was this astonishing tapestry of scientific genius interwoven with intense social and institutional resistance. The double laureate, the groundbreaker in atomic theory, the mother of modern cancer treatment, and a radical wartime humanitarian.
And I think what we uncover most clearly is the depth of her struggle against that systemic resistance.
Yeah.
She faced down partitioning empires, crippling poverty, blatant academic sexism in 2 different countries, and vicious xenophobia from the French press.
Her life really serves as this powerful historical model. It demonstrates that the greatest discoveries often require immense personal sacrifice and a radical, defiant refusal to conform to established norms, both scientific and social.
It is an unparalleled story of achievement, fueled by sheer, unstoppable intellectual willpower. But there is a final physical detail from our sources that connects her legacy directly to us today. It ties that dangerous pioneering work right into the material present.
This is an amazing detail.
It really is. Marie Curie's dedication to knowledge is so complete that it literally transcends her death. Her papers from the 1890s, the ones detailing the isolation of polonium and radium, and even her cookbooks and personal effects, are still highly radioactive today.
So radioactive that they have to be kept in lead-lined boxes. And to consult them, to physically touch the remnants of her scientific genius, you have to wear protective clothing and sign a waiver over a century later.
So we leave you with this thought. What does it mean for a scientist's work to literally defy decay, forcing future generations to handle the physical remnants of her genius with danger and with respect? That permanent toxic imprint is the ultimate measure of her profound and enduring impact on our world.
A truly immortal radioactive legacy. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.